Putting language assessment in its place. Language is evidence about people. It is a natural reaction to hearing or reading any fragment of language to use it as evidence about the person who produced it. When we speak on the telephone to people whom we have not met, we may use the sound of their voice, its accent, and pitch to give us clues about whether they are native speakers of our language, which region they come from, their gender, age, social class and profession, and their mood and attitudes. It seems that we can't help forming an opinion about people according to the kind of language they produce. In Britain, surveys of customers of telephone call centers investigating attitudes toward accent show that British people tend to associate American accent with high levels of success, Scottish accents with trustworthiness, and the accent of people who come from large cities such as London, Liverpool, and Birmingham with low levels of both. These attitudes may be unreasonable, but we are more likely to listen to and believe messages delivered by voices that we find pleasing and trustworthy. Businesses know this and carefully choose actors with suitable accent to deliver their advertising messages. If we receive a letter or email from someone, we base similar judgments on their choice of words and written style. We may even begin to form ideas about their appearance and personality. As you read this, you are probably already building up a picture in your mind of the writer of this book. When you do this kind of thing, you are using the language that a person produces to make inferences or draw conclusions about them. Linguistic evidence can sometimes be used quite formally to give insights into a person's identity or personality. Experts in forensic linguistics often try to establish where a suspect comes from by studying his or her accent or speech patterns. Sometimes, employers look at the size and shape of job applicants' handwriting because this is supposed to give insights into their personalities. However, this kind of inferences about people's regional origins or characteristics are not usually what is implied by the term language assessment. In this book, the focus is on assessment where knowledge about language, the ability to use language or skill in applying this are measured or evaluated. In everyday life, we not only make judgments about people on the basis of how they use language, we also make judgment about the qualities of the language that they use. We notice when they make grammatical errors or choose an inappropriate word, when they appear impolite or overly formal, when they are very hesitant, when they are being unclear or imprecise, or, on the other hand, when they seem to express their ideas particularly well. We also judge our own use of language. As we speak or write, we monitor and correct ourselves. We put right our slips of the tongue and fix our spelling mistake. With or without the help of our word processing software, we rephrase the things we say if people misunderstand us. We recognize our written text to try to make our ideas clearer to our readers. The nature of the knowledge, skills, and abilities involved in learning and using a language is a matter of debate. An introduction to some of the contentious issues that have excited language assessment specialists is given in Part 3. Briefly, knowledge about language may include recognizing a word written in a foreign language and knowing in translation equivalent, or knowing grammatical rule, the past participle in English, regular verbs is formed by adding ed to the stem, look, looked, or knowing pragmatic conventions. For example, in most circumstances, how are you? Spoken by an acquaintance is likely to be intended as a conventional greeting. The anticipated response might be, good you, rather than details of the other's feelings or of any medical conditions. A distinction is often made in language education following Himes' 1972 between knowledge of the rules governing language as a system and the ability to actually use use language in unrehearsed interaction. Learners may know a good deal about a language but be unable to access the words or phrases they know in the course of a conversation or be unable to pronounce them accurately. Conversely, many people are able to communicate effectively in a wide range of situations with little or no explicit knowledge of the systems of rules that govern the language they are using. Language skills involve drawing on language knowledge and language abilities in order to read, listen, write, speak, to interact with others, or to mediate between them. The evidence we have of a person using a language may be very limited. A few telephone conversations and a handful of emails, perhaps, but based on what we observe in these few instances, we often make inferences about their more general knowledge of a language, their ability to use the language, and their skill in carrying out language related tasks. We may hear them speak for just a few minutes, but reach conclusions such as, Adele knows more Albanian than I do, or Bonita can get by in Bengali. We see a few examples of their writing, and we make statements such as, Carol can write very polished business letters in Chinese, or Di finds it really difficult to form questions in Danish. The major focus of this book will be on the use of language assessment in educational context. This setting for language assessment is unusual in some important ways. Firstly, language teachers, unlike most of us, are actually expected to voice their judgments about other people's language use and are generally rewarded for pointing out and correcting errors. If you have worked as a language teacher, you will probably have experience during the natural course of any lesson of deciding whether one of your students has produced accurate and appropriate language, and perhaps putting right mistakes they have made or asking them to try again. You have probably asked them to read or listen to a text in the foreign language and then asked them questions about it to check their understanding. As I define language assessment in this book, examples can range from informal classroom activities to well-known national and international language tests. So here is a simple definition. Language assessment involves obtaining evidence to inform inferences about a person's language-related knowledge, skills, or abilities. The evidence comes from the performance of tasks that involve the use of language. The inferences are what we interpret the performance to mean based on our beliefs about the nature of language and its role in the life of the person being assessed. The inferences we make about assesses, the term I will use in this book for the people being assessed, are generally used to inform decisions, decisions that can range in magnitude from whether it would be better for them to use another comma in a sentence or practice saying a certain phrase again, to whether they should be given a job or permitted to make their home in a certain country. In language education, teacher training programs tend to give assessment rather little attention. Assessment is often the topic of just a few sessions, apparently an issue of little direct concern to the teacher, perhaps better left to expert specialists. On the other hand, it sometimes seems to take on overriding importance in the lives of teachers and learners. Many school children, if asked why they are learning a foreign language, would answer that they are doing it mainly to pass a public test, often known as an examination. Most language teachers spend a good deal of time assessing their students, and especially when the day of an important national examination is getting close, many dedicate most of their classes to preparing their students to take these tests. In this book, I argue that language assessment is inseparable from the teaching and learning of languages. This challenges the more tradition view in teacher education that assessment is a distinct activity, one that is marginal to the main business of the language teacher. In my view, teachers need to develop what is sometimes called assessment literacy. They not only need to understand something about how language assessments are made, scored, and interpreted by others, but also to be able to make, score, and interpret the results of the useful assessment themselves. Experience suggests that low levels of the assessment literacy can lead to bad educational decisions and to teaching and learning that are less effective than they could be. Assessment and testing. The traditional view that separates assessment from teaching may result from the identification of the word assessment with the narrower activity of testing. A test is an event that is specially set up to elicit a performance, usually within a predetermined time frame, for the purpose of the making judgments about a person's knowledge, skills, or abilities in the course of a language test. The person being judged will respond to a prompt question asked by an interviewer a set of choices. The test taker's response is judged or scored according to a mark scheme. This is a predetermined procedure such as identifying and calculating the proportion of correct answers. 14 out of 20, counting the number of errors in a piece of writing. Assigning points or marks to an essay to match descriptions presented on a scale, etc. The outcome is a score or grade, which is then formally recorded. The formalities and rituals of formal testing and the penalties associated with failure can make them an intimidating experience for the test taker. For some commenters, assessment is distinguished from testing because it covers a much broader cycle of activities in addition to the test event, which involves eliciting a performance as evidence of the language abilities. These activities include deciding on the content of the test, scoring the performance, deciding on the meaning of the scores obtained, decisions that the scores are used to justify, such as choosing which students to admit onto a course or deciding whether to award certificates. In this view, the test is just one step in a sequence of events which together make up a cycle of assessment. From another point of view, the word testing can refer to this entire cycle of assessment events, but tests are understood to make up a relatively small set of controlled procedures among a much broader range of options. Assessment in a more general term than testing and takes in many different methods of obtaining and evaluating language data, including less formal procedures with fewer controls and restrictions than tests. While it can be helpful to remind ourselves that assessment involves a whole cycle of interrelated activities, it is the second of these distinctions, the range of options for obtaining informations, that is more often made is discussions of language assessment, and so is the one used in this book. The contrast to test other forms of assessment may involve such as activities as informal questioning in class by teachers, semi-formal exercise and quizzes carried out in class, learners reflecting on their own use of language self-assessment, learners judging each other's performance peer assessment, the collection of samples of language that have not been elicited according to any fixed or formal plans. Example of these include observation and some forms of portfolio assessment. Observations involve teachers watching and recorded student performance in classroom activities. Portfolios are collection of student work that may showcase their best achievements or represent progress over a period of time. Other approaches to assessment that do, like tests, involve specific prompts. Example, classroom exercise of the kind found in most textbooks may not be carried out under controlled conditions, such as set time constraints or curbs on discussing answers with fellow students. Scores may not be formally recorded as evidence of the student's abilities. In fact, reporting does not need to involve the award of grades or scores at all, but may, for example, involve highlighting errors or giving descriptive commentaries on performance. It is important to understand that tests are not the only means of judging learners' language knowledge, skills, and abilities, and that not all language assessment are formal procedures that lead to scores or grades. On the contrary, most language assessments are informal, unobtrusive, involve no special arrangements, and do not cause particular anxiety or fear in the people who are being assessed. Assessment, teaching, and learning. There are a number of different strategies we can use when we learn a new skill from another person. Perhaps the simplest of these is imitation. One person, the learner, watches what another person does and then attempts it for him or herself. When animals learn skills, this generally appears to be how they do it. We know that some chimpanzees, for example, can learn how to carry out quite sophisticated tasks, such as using a stick as a tool to catch insects by copying the action of other members of their group. They're cap- they carefully observe what the skilled chimpanzee does, recognizing the one set of actions, such as shaping a stick, is related to another, poking the stick into a tree trunk, and that these actions together bring a reward, a meal of insects. They then try to recreate the same series of actions themselves to get the same reward. Chimpanzees are very good at imitation and they often perform better than human is carrying out intricate imitation tasks. Assessment of this kind of learning can be straightforward, combining imitation with the process of trial and error. Learners either succeed in accomplishing the task or repeatedly fail and eventually give up. Although it is possible to build knowledge by observing and copying, imitation alone is a limited way of passing on skills, and the more complex the skill, the less effective imitation seems to be. A child can watch an adult driving a car and try to copy the movements she sees, but that will probably not make her a safe and effective driver. When she has the chance to take the wheel, when learning a language, I try to imitate the sounds of the speakers of the language make to memorize words and grammatical patterns, but that is not likely to be enough to enable me to communicate effectively. Learning complex skills like this is much more effective if we understand something about why people perform certain actions and how those actions help them to accomplish the task they want to carry out. This level of understanding is easier to achieve if we have another person to teach us. In order to teach, people need both to understand the others can't do what they themselves can do and to be motivated to pass on their own knowledge. When a person has mastered a new skill, they often share their newfound ability not only by showing, inviting others to watch they perform the skill, or telling, explaining to the learners how do it, but also by attending to the learners and judging how well they have understood and how close they are to being able to carry out the task independently. Human learners do not usually simply imitate their teacher, but actively try to make sense of what they are learning, not only to notice that carrying out a sequence of actions leads to a particular outcome, but to understand why it does so. The teacher can support the learner by observing the learner's effort and providing feedback, pointing out what they are doing well and what they are doing poorly in order to help them to improve. As our willingness to teach is other in this way is one reason why we are so more efficient than animals at preserving and developing our collective knowledge and technologies. Understanding the gap between what learners can do now and what they need to be able to do or understand in order to fulfill a task successfully requires a sophisticated awareness both of the task and the learners. In the case of language learning, learners need to build an understanding of how people can use language to accomplish tasks such as establishing a rapport with another person, buying clothes, or getting their haircut. Assessment that takes account of this requires more than simple judgments of success or failure, as well as having a good mastery of the skill herself and the ability to model the skill in ways that make it more accessible to the learner. The good teacher breaks down complex skill into the different elements that contribute to success. The teacher recognizes which of these the learners are able to do independently, which they can do with some help or prompting, and which remain well beyond their abilities. The teacher may allow learners to carry out parts of a task that they are already able to accomplish, but offer help with the more challenging stages. Think of how a mother might help a child to assemble a model or cook a meal, letting the child carry out the task but asking questions, pointing out mistakes, perhaps actually carrying out some of the most complex step in the process herself before asking the child to try to replicate what she has done, giving feedback at the same time on what the child is doing well and how he might do better. Another way in which people learn new skills is through working together to solve problems by acting as a team. People can do things that no individual member could do when acting alone. Think of teams of engineers or medical researchers developing innovative machinery or new treatments. The members of the group create new forms of knowledge by participating together in activities, and the relationship between them can be very important to the kinds of learning what will occur. This kind of collective social learning can be challenging to assess, especially when using traditional tests, grades, and scores, because it is difficult to establish what contribution each group member has made to the outcome. In order to achieve better outcomes, members of the group may need to come to understand for themselves what aspects of the activity they might be able to carry out in different ways to achieve better results. Because assessment is used for a wide variety of purposes, it is quite easy to conceive of assessment taking place without teaching. One reason why many learners don't like public tests is that the test providers do not often give them any advice on which question they answered correctly or incorrectly. The test teaches them nothing. On the other hand, it is almost impossible to imagine any form of teaching that does not involve assessment. Even in the most traditional classrooms, based on a transmission model of teaching, which assumes that learning is mainly or wholly dependent on the teacher telling a group of students new information. The content of the lectures is intended to fill a gap between what the students are believed to know already and what they need to know in order to succeed. To be really effective in teachers, we need to find effective ways of assessing learners. We then need to use what we learn from assessment to decide on actions to take that will help learners to improve their knowledge of the language or their skills in using it. A major challenge for language educators is that the process of learning a second language is still rather poorly understood. Second language acquisition. Researchers who investigate this process disagree about the fundamental mechanism of language learning, and a number of competing theories can be found. In assessing learners, we need to be clear about how we believe languages are learned, what kinds of evidence we might be able to collect to show us what learners know about a language, what they are able to use the language to do, what they have difficulty with, and how we can help them to expand their abilities. Another troublesome issue in assessing language learning is the extent of disagreement about the purposes for learning languages. For some, languages should be taught in school as a necessary basic skill, just as we need to learn arithmetic in order to operate in the modern world. Shopping using banking services, checking our taxes, so we need foreign languages to do business and to interact with people from other countries. There are said to be economic benefits for countries with a linguistically adaptable labor force. For others, the primary benefit of learning languages has more to do with what Cook 2008 described as brain training. Languages help us to develop our intelligence or adopt more flexible ways of thinking. Traditionally, a major purpose for learning languages was personal development through the understanding of classic works of literature and some becoming more cultured. What we choose to assess will, of course, reflect what we think are the key purposes for language learning. People generally tend to believe that language assessments give them pertinent information that can help them to make good decisions. If they are right, assessment may be useful tools that improve teaching and learning and serve society more generally. On the other hand, a lack of assessment information, poor information from badly conceived assessments, or even poorly understood information from well conceived assessment may lead to regrettable decisions. Teaching and learning will suffer, able people will be denied opportunities, and society will experience the negative effects. It is very important that we carry out language assessment as well as we can and use the results in a well informed manner.